nice room. I'm hoping you're enjoying our conversation we're about to have, and you can take a seat, please. Thank you. Really appreciate it. So I'm glad. I hope some of you were here for the last session. This is kind of, I think, a nice pairing, if you will, a nice, fine pairing. I'm Heather Clancy. I am with GreenBiz, and I am pleased to be here with Climate Week's headline partner. I've actually not heard that as a sponsor term before, but that's a cool term. I like it. The Estée Lauder companies. And I think many of you know their brands. I mean, of course, this is the iconic brand, but I didn't even know this, I'm embarrassed to say, but MAC, Clinique, Bobbi Brown, Bumble and Bubble, obviously a huge force in the fragrance, makeup, skincare markets, and a very diverse portfolio sold in more than 150 countries. So tremendously powerful company, and one that's putting their leadership on climate to work for its suppliers. We heard from Nancy Mann, the chief of this program earlier this week at the opening ceremony, and I'm just delighted with all of the things that the company has done on so many different levels, not just in terms of sustainability, but in terms of human rights and just fundamental social progress. So we're going to hear from this panel in a moment. I'm going to introduce them in a moment about supplier engagement and education and the importance of really getting that foundation work done. But first, we're going to hear from an individual who couldn't join us today but has some things to say. So we could cue that video, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be able to introduce this session. As you know, in Estée Lauder companies, we're very passionate about supplier collaboration, and in this case, supplier collaboration as we address the climate opportunities. I'm looking forward for you to have a great discussion and a great session. This is clearly a very important area for us and very important area for me personally as the supplier relationship leader for the Estée Lauder companies. So sorry I cannot be here today. I'm traveling as we speak, but look forward to a very productive session. Thank you.
Perfect. So with that, I would love to introduce our panelists, and I'll let them each say something about themselves. I won't read their bios, but they'll give us some context as to their point of view in this conversation. We have Megan Ryan. She's the Executive Director for Responsible Sourcing for ELC. Matt Banks, and he is the Associate Director with Guidehouse, which oversees an initiative you're going to hear about quite a bit about more in a moment, Supplier Leadership on Climate Transition, or Supplier LoCT. And then we also have Kate Jolly. She's the Sustainable Sourcing Manager for TAG, which is one of ELC's long-held and long-term suppliers. So Megan, and then down the row, just tell us a little bit about your role and your view on this particular topic.
Yeah, thank you so much, Heather. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Ryan with Estée Lauder Companies, Executive Director of Responsible Sourcing, sitting in our procurement team. You just heard from Roberto Magana, our leader and Chief Procurement Officer. In my role, I focus on advancing our responsible sourcing strategy and implementation. That includes a range of topics from due diligence to responsible sourcing of ingredients. And I'm also quite happy and proud that it also includes responsibility for working on our climate engagement with suppliers.
Perfect. Kate.
Yeah, my name's Kate Jolly. I work for TAG. TAG's a global production house. We produce products for Estée Lauder, which we've worked for a long time, as we said. We produce marketing materials, so all the way from sourcing right through to production assets that you would see in-house and in stores. For me, what I'm responsible for really is making sure that the client that we work for, whoever that may be, that we can help them solve some of the problems they have from a sustainability angle. That can be sourcing raw materials, it can be sourcing ideas or new innovation, and some challenges that we might have.
Perfect.
Great.
Matt.
Yeah, hello, good afternoon, Matt Banks. First of all, thank you to Estée Lauder and to the Climate Group for the opportunity to talk with you today. Based in Washington, D.C., I've been at the core of the corporate response to climate change for over 20 years. Previous to this role, I was leading the Climate Savers program for WWF, and we worked with about 60 companies around the world in 60 different sectors before there were any standards for climate leadership, and tried to create a model company in each sector that others could follow. And then I helped kick off and launch the Science-Based Targets Initiative in Paris in 2015. And in 2018, when that became sort of a commercial reality, I joined the firm of which I was a client. So the technical firm that had been my guiding light asked me to come and build out their sustainability practice. So we help companies with their climate strategy in food, beverage, pharma, tech, transport, real estate, quick service restaurants, retail, apparel, all sort of building out their response to climate and then helping them communicate that publicly. And then in 2019, we saw a huge, remarkable opportunity to help them respond to the SBTi's request for not only having operational targets, but then taking on supply chain. And that was a bit of an awakening for a lot of sustainability managers who we find our tribe, and we're helping our tribe, sort of overcome these big obstacles.
Perfect, thank you. So to get the stage set even further, I think it would be useful for us to understand a little bit more about ELC's journey. And to do that, we're going to start with another quick video.
The beauty of the world as we know it is at stake. In this critical decade, the global community is faced with the challenge of confronting the impacts and consequences of a dramatically changing climate. Consequences that have ripple effects, which will only deepen gender gaps and widen economic and racial equity disparities. At the Estée Lauder companies, we're committed to putting the values that have defined and inspired us over the past 7 decades towards even more decisive action on climate change. From investing in green energy solutions, to driving innovations in the sustainability of our luxury products across our brand portfolio, to setting ambitious targets in line with climate science, and supporting those that are leading the essential work to help advance equitable climate solutions. But we aren't alone in our vision. To get there, we'll need holistic plans and everyone at the table, because the urgent need for environmental action must go hand in hand with strengthening our global communities, particularly for women and girls. So, what will we make of this moment? Bold and swift action across diverse stakeholder groups is needed to forge a common pathway towards substantial emissions reductions. One where ambition is matched with actionable plans and efforts are championed collaboratively. Because we firmly believe that the benefits of a healthy climate and a beautiful world should be shared by everyone, now and for generations to come.
Very powerful, very powerful. Can you take us deeper, Megan? That message, the key messages there, how is that translating to specific action for
Yeah, would be happy to. Well, I think, as we saw in the video, the Estée Lauder companies is deeply committed to tackling climate change, and we're guided by our goals. We have science-based targets out to 2030, and that guides our work. We've made a lot of great strides over the past couple of years, and like many other companies who are participating this week, we've especially made progress in our Scope 1 and 2 emissions, which are tied to our own operations, where we have a lot of control and ability to influence. We've made great progress. But Scope 3 is the area where we know that we need to lean in and do more. If you heard Nancy Mann in the opening ceremony, she shared that over 95% of the Estée Lauder company's emissions are in our supply chain. Mm-hmm. So for us, it's even more imperative that we work with our suppliers and we partner and collaborate to make progress. We've done a few things so far. In the past couple of years, we joined CDP Supply Chain. That's been a great vehicle for us to be able to engage with top suppliers around reporting and data, ensuring that we're understanding their progress on climate, getting their emissions data directly from them. That's been a great asset to our approach. We've also convened a number of supplier summits focused on sustainability, and that's been a great way to bring suppliers together into a room to tackle shared challenges, to share best practices, to create some of that alchemy of cross-pollination that only happens when we come together. And we've done those focused on sustainable ingredients, sustainable packaging, and also on store design and visual merchandising. We've also partnered with suppliers on specific projects. We think a lot about the sustainability attributes of our products. So we might work with a particular supplier around a specific innovation opportunity and working with our products to help improve the sustainability profile, including their emissions. And so we've made these strides, which has been great. And we've also learned a lot from that experience. Sitting in procurement, our teams are talking with suppliers day in and day out. They're understanding what their pain points are on climate and other topics. And we did a lot of listening to think about what were the barriers to our suppliers' progress and how could we take a more proactive role in helping them to take that next step in the climate journey. And a lot of the feedback that we heard was very similar, no matter if we were talking to a smaller supplier or larger supplier, suppliers in different industries, different geographies. What we were hearing loud and clear was that there was a know-how gap and a resources gap for many of our suppliers. So we thought hard about what we should do with that information. How should we act on that insight from our suppliers? And it was clear to us that upskilling suppliers on climate and building their literacy on the basics from what is a greenhouse gas emission to how do I calculate my footprint, getting all the way up to setting targets and taking action would be necessary to our making progress on that 97% of our footprint. So we looked around and talked to friends and peers in the sustainability space, and we heard about a great program called Supplier S-LoCT, or Supplier Leadership on Climate Transition. And we decided to join the consortium, which you'll hear more about from Matt in a bit. And we're very proud to be the first beauty brand to have joined that group of companies and now are bringing best-in-class climate training on the basics to over 50 of our suppliers, including TAG, with Kate and her team participating in those trainings and really being one of our suppliers who's leading the way on climate.
And one of the founding partners of that coalition, if you will, the initiative, thanked you for all of the engagement that you're doing. I was speaking with Mars earlier this week, and they pointed out, wow, they've just really engaged a lot of their partners. Actually, a quick follow-up for you. I think it said that you were really focused on 200 of your suppliers. Like, what prompted you to pick those particular ones? I mean, it was a portion of your spend, but what about it?
Yeah, we consider a number of different factors when we think about how we want to engage our suppliers and in which programs, through which mechanisms. So that number of 200 was the suppliers that we selected for CDP. But when it came to picking suppliers to offer them the opportunity to join S-LoCT, we thought about a number of things. We considered our business relationship to the suppliers. Again, sitting in procurement, we were sitting down with our category leads to say, where do we stand with suppliers? Who is strategic? Who do we want to partner with and offer this opportunity? We also thought about their emissions contribution. Of course, we want to tackle suppliers who really represent a decent chunk of our emissions. And we also really wanted to take an inclusive approach. So we were sure to include women-owned and Black-owned and small suppliers as part of that population to really make sure we were thinking about a just transition and bringing everyone along. So those were some of the factors that went into our selection criteria.
Perfect, thanks. So we've heard a little bit about this program. We're going to hear more now in a moment. I'm going to start with another quick video. I think this might be our last one, but it's another quick, get really it out short. There. Yeah. So if we could cue that one up, that'd be great. Thanks.
Suppliers needed to lead climate action. Suppliers provide the materials and ingredients for the products we rely on in every aspect of our lives. And while growing demand is good for business, it's not always good for the planet. Excess greenhouse gas emissions from traditional ways of working traps heat in the atmosphere, leading to rising temperatures and dangerous weather patterns. We must change how we do things. Transitions aren't easy, but they're better when we work together. We are inviting suppliers to be leaders on climate change action. Through the Supplier Leadership on Climate Transition, Guidehouse sustainability experts provide suppliers instruction on measuring their carbon footprint and pursuing science-based targets for emission reductions. The Supplier Leadership on Climate Transition works for the planet and for your business. Join us.
Okay, Matt, you're up. Let's hear a little bit more. Let's go deeper with the background here.
Sure. Yeah, it's this remarkable pandemic story, if you will. Kind of a funny course of events. So back in November of 2019, we decided to really tackle this issue. We had been working for a company that brought us in to educate their councils, their supplier councils. So their beef council, their bakery council, and their logistics council. And we'd sort of seen the power of that across those suppliers and thought, what if we do this at a larger scale? And you know, I kind of cut my teeth doing a lot of collective action coalition building over the years. And so we brought companies together in Philadelphia for a roundtable, and we looked at their supply chains. We had them map out every link in the chain up on butcher block paper, and we sort of looked at where could we have the most greenhouse gas impact first, and then where could we work together. And there were 4 categories that came up. So it was really ingredients, packaging, contract manufacturers, and logistics or transportation. And in the end, what we did over a course of, sort of 7 design sessions after the roundtable was come up with something that works for any supplier. And so it's an education platform where they work through 5 areas of focus, depending upon where they are in the journey. So if you look up here, depending on where they're at from regards to their climate action at this point, they can start in operational footprinting, value chain footprinting, target setting, and then we've now added abatement and disclosure for this season. And we're doing this in 6-month seasons where they take 1 track at a time. There's a homework assignment after each course seminar, and then they graduate that track and they get a badge that symbolizes that they've completed that component. And then in addition, we're looking at adding other tracks like green finance. How do you then pay for these reductions across your company? So I'll stop there. There's a lot more to say, but
I do want to ask a quick follow-up, just because I'm looking at the brands and making the industry connection. So, like, to what extent does a Coca-Cola and a Keurig Dr. Pepper try to say, hey, like, these are our suppliers that we should, these are the ones we should encourage? To what extent do they get involved with encouraging the ones that might be the same for the 2 of them?
Yeah, so what we have counseled companies to do is take a look at their footprint and focus on this nexus of suppliers with a high climate impact but low climate maturity. And so the other thing that you should know about these industries, consumer-facing brands, is that 20% of the suppliers usually have 80% of the impact. So we're starting with between 40 and 50 suppliers that companies bring into the program, and then we cross-reference that to see if one of those suppliers has already gone through, and they can swap that out for another supplier.
Sure, okay.
Could I just tag on
You
to that?
may, yeah.
I think one of the reasons why this model is so powerful and we didn't decide to launch an Estée Lauder company's training program is because of the power of this network effect. So we were asked by Guidehouse to give a list of 50 or so suppliers that we'd love to see in the program, and we got a bonus of 7 or 8 others that were invited by other brands that are part of the collective. So it's a great way to, when we're thinking about scale, when we're thinking about the urgency of the challenges ahead of us, coming together is the fastest way for us to reach the maximum number of suppliers, because we do have many that are shared.
Right, so Kate, you're a supplier.
Oh, yeah.
And you are in this program. Tell us a little bit first about your own climate journey, and then we'll move to how your experience has been with the program.
Yeah, great. So TAG was part of a company called Williams Lee TAG Group, and and actually we split as a company. So from the journey we'd been on, we were quite clear where we were going, and obviously in 2021 that changed, and we had to start looking at how do we move forward. We're a very different business. And really, for the last sort of couple of years, we've been trying to set the framework and the foundations for how we should work as a business, how some of the key elements that we need to put in place, things like policies, systems, processes, and management. And those have been some of the key drivers that we've had. The certifications for some of the sites as well has been really important. So, as a company, making sure we're meeting the requirements of most of our clients. So if I said, we're FSC certified across 6 sites across the globe, we've got ISO 14001, putting the management systems in place to make sure that, we can drive in the right direction. We've built into our policies and our framework things like external influences. So we've not only got our own internal program that we want to drive, but we also take on the likes of, what are the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? How can you build those into your own framework? All of that said, that sets the foundation. And then from there, really, we've been spending the last year developing the information because we've committed to science-based targets. We haven't set a target yet. 2022 is really going to be our foundation year, from which we will then be able to say, as you're saying, which is the biggest impact area, where should we focus, and how do we drive forward to meet some of those goals? Mm-hmm. Because as a supplier, each client has a different set of goals and requirements, and really trying to balance that across can be quite difficult. Lots of challenges. People want different bits of data in different ways. So, that can be impactful on a business, because the time that it takes to collect that.
When you're saying people want the data, you mean talking about your customers, that different customers want bits of information? Got it.
Yeah, so different customers would like different information in different formats. Yeah. Different time periods, different levels of detail, and that can be impactful.
Mm-hmm. So what prompted you to get involved with this program?
For me, I think what this really provides is, if we look at a supply chain, we're all impacting it. We're all a little link in the chain. And as a supplier, having a consistent approach is really important. So, being able to join with other companies, as you said, everybody sort of links and crosses over. We've got the same clients who are on, working on this program as well. So therefore, to be able to provide something in a consistent manner, ensuring that, we're meeting the requirements of all those is really, really helpful and supportive for us.
So just one more question along these lines. What did it take to join? What was the process like? What prompted you to join this particular program? It was just encouragement from your...
Yeah, so since I started, I've been with the TAG for about 2 years. And when I first joined, one of the first things I wanted to do was, take a look at our client base. And one of the key clients that we have was Estée Lauder's company. And I wanted to look and see where the impacts were because, as you say, the rule of 80-20 is really, really important. And for me, I should be supporting clients, or for TAG as a company, we should be supporting clients. So for me, upward support as well as downward support is really important because we're starting to sit in the middle. And therefore, working together for that 2 years really has helped build on that partnership and that relationship. And therefore, for me, then, this is really sort of how we moved into doing this. The process actually is really simple. It is really, really simple. The seminars that are given by the team here are really informative. What I would say is it's great because, we talk about empowering everybody in the business to make changes. So for us, we were allowed to bring in a number of our representatives within the TAG team. And that means, it's not just one person trying to fight the battle. there's then, a variety of people within the business. That then makes that change accelerate. So, allowing that to happen is really good. And then, some of the gaps that we might have had as a business were really important because actually you showed us, some areas that we could improve on. And then it was also easy for us to say, actually, yeah, we're doing the right thing here as well. So that double checking is really good. But the support behind the lines is, fantastic.
Megan, from your perspective, what benefits have you seen from organizations like TAG being involved in this program? Like, how has it changed the relationship with those suppliers?
Yeah, I think it's been great to see some of the outcomes of the program. We've had the first semester, as Matt referenced it, that we participated is just wrapping up now. So we've had about 50 suppliers that have completed the program. I think a couple of things have been beneficial. One is Matt described that model of suppliers being able to plug in no matter where they are. And we have a very broad supplier base. We have suppliers like TAG who are ready to set a science-based target, and we see as more advanced, and they're able to take a program that is more tailored to where they are and is going to help them to reinforce their good practices, but also teach them a few things and kind of help take them up that next rung of the climate action ladder, if you will. But we have other suppliers who are much earlier in the journey, who are more at the what is a greenhouse gas, how do I calculate my footprint? And in speaking with our suppliers about their experience, they're giving us feedback to say, this is the first time I've been able to calculate my carbon footprint. I didn't know what my emissions were until we did this program. Or for some who had done their scope 1 and 2 footprint, they said this is the first time we've tackled scope 3, and now we know what our footprint looks like. And so all of these achievements we see as kind of stepping stones to action, which is what we all need to see, right? This is the urgent time for us to see suppliers taking action, but we need the fundamentals in place. But we've got these concrete, they're anecdotes for now as we're talking with our suppliers and getting the skinny on how they've fared in the program, but we're also getting feedback from the Guidehouse team in terms of here's your attendance record for your suppliers, here's how many completed their homework assignments. So these are some of the nuts and bolts that help us to keep tabs on how things are going, and also to reach out and to do the little bit of encouragement or pushing that we can, especially from the procurement side, where these are the commercial points of contact at the suppliers that they're working with day to day.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about that. So do your engagement teams have KPIs they're looking at from these suppliers, and do they, as part of their relationship management, are they being asked to go and look and specifically see what they're doing?
Our team is keeping our procurement partners informed, so we pulse out updates to our category teams so that they have a sense of where things stand, or if we see something that maybe needs addressing, we would ask their advice on how we would go about, bringing it up. And we've seen some suppliers reach out to their commercial contacts and say, hey, I'm struggling with this aspect of the program, and then we can get activated, or we'll pull in the Guidehouse team for support. So it's really been that kind of wraparound support and careful management of the program, bringing in the commercial leads where needed to make sure that we're really encouraging suppliers to participate. And also, we were talking about this before the panel started, we're all still learning. This is a relatively new program. So sometimes when suppliers are bringing us feedback or critical feedback even, that's a useful way to strengthen the model of the program, and Guidehouse has been great in absorbing that feedback and really thinking about how to continuously improve the program.
Yeah. So one of the things that Kate was just referencing was the data management and reporting different way, and the different time frames and so forth. Matt, from your perspective, how can you help smaller organizations do that? What's the sort of secret to success to getting them to be able to do that? How do you engage?
Well, we have completely reformulated, reoriented, and sort of remade how the greenhouse gas protocol and the SBTI is taught and coached, because all of this stuff was created for Fortune 250 companies. And believe it or not, the GHG protocol is mostly only in English. So one of the challenges we've been confronting the last few months is, can we look at translation of the curriculum into probably Mandarin and Spanish as a first foray into that. So So yeah, I mean, we're simplifying it. We're making it, really a stepwise approach in each seminar. We're also making it fun. A lot of this stuff is really dry, and it can be really boring, and it's accounting, and you don't want it to feel like accounting because you want to feel like you're saving the world. So yeah, we've tried to make it interesting.
So
tried
how
to
are you
make
making it fun?
So the team is awesome, I have to say. We have this legacy Ecofist team in the Netherlands that's been working with companies on these issues even longer than in North America. And so they're putting in, gamified ways of getting through the seminars. They also created this mock company called Cheesy Corp, which is a example that we use throughout to kind of see how Cheesy Corp is reducing its emissions. We really want to bring some fresh energy to this topic, and I along with Vincent Hone and others that are here in the audience today, just saw a massive opportunity to mobilize the brands behind the brands, okay? So this is the next wave of companies that has not been touched by this issue. And frankly, if we don't get them to reduce their emissions by 2025 and 2030, we're gonna miss all those targets. So we've got to focus on this demographic.
So what are some of the challenges that you're running into that maybe you didn't expect?
Yeah, I think
You mentioned the language thing.
some companies in the consortium have sent a very strong and clear message to their suppliers. I mean, Estée Lauder has hosted a number of sort of entry-level topic seminars on the climate issue, but others haven't. They haven't done some of the heavy lifting of really kind of telling their suppliers that this is a must-do. And then others have, and Mars, for example, they got their suppliers to come to New York in Climate Week 2018, I believe it was, or not? No, 2019.
Yeah.
And they had them sign Planet Pledge, and they've basically said you either have to have a science-based target or RE100 by 2025, or you're not going to be a supplier. I think that's been the hardest part is how do we really push action more quickly? And then, yeah, I mean, you have to have the suppliers really bought in on committing to complete the track and the season. And by the way, we called it seasons because it was the pandemic and people were inclined to Netflix seasons. So,
Oh my God. So we talk about this is essentially a collaboration. I mean, this is a collaboration between Estée Lauder companies and TAG, and of course, this organization as well. But why is that important? So talk to me about how that is part of the education process.
Yeah, I think collaboration is, it's critical to making the magnitude of change that we all need to make. I think it's been a theme of the week, of course, this being Climate Week, that collaboration is essential. And for the Estée Lauder companies, collaboration is in our DNA. And this example of collaboration is just one among many for how we're tackling the climate challenge. So I think it's essential. I talked a little bit about the network effect that we saw as one of the really big benefits of doing this through a collaborative approach. And I think some of the other benefits, we're putting suppliers together in a cohort, almost like a university cohort or an MBA cohort. And so there is that opportunity for best practice sharing, for exchange. You're kind of seeing the questions that other suppliers are posing. That's sparking things for you. As Kate mentioned, you can bring along plus ones, and you can have 5 people from your team sitting in on these climate lessons. So it's creating this great community of suppliers who are all engaged and working through this together. And I think we're going to see some unintended benefits of that. Maybe there'll be some new connections that are made or new ideas, cross-pollination that's happening that we have yet to see since we're so early in the journey still so far.
And this is for anyone, what do we think are the obstacles to? I mean, this is great, and this is one example of a great program. There are others. We need lots of others. We need a lot of scale. What are the obstacles that are in front of us? You mentioned one of them with this sort of C-suite proclamations and support. Other things that companies should be willing to tackle?
So I think
Kate?
for me, it has to be that commitment from the top. That really unlocks the door for the teams underneath to be able to start the roadmap to where they want to go, because it is around data collection. And, you know, everybody in the supply chain, you know, you say 95% is within your supply chain. Well, then I go to 95% of my emissions are in my supply chain. And then you start dropping that back down the supply chain. And it is really important that you can drive that through. But what I think is really important is that the opportunity that you share with, you know, the Supplier S-LoCT program is something that we can kind of almost then take to our top suppliers and say, look, this is how we can start to change. And it is really en masse that we need to look at doing that change and that coordination. But yeah.
The barriers really are the same for any type of company, large, small, medium, and it's something that's been coming up a lot over the last 2 decades. It's access to capital, lack of management attention, and lack of expertise. This was one of the hallmarks of some early work before science-based targets called the 3% solution. And those things really still plague this issue today. There needs to be more capital allocated, there needs to be more management attention, and there needs to be more expertise. And so this helps solve for the expertise, but you know, Johnson & Johnson has an internal capital relief fund for their 200 operating companies that any of those companies can come to if they have a climate project they want to implement. And it's those types of things that make very quick gains because they can, you know, get the renewables project in place, the efficiency project, or, you know, something else that's going to help move the needle.
Great.
I would just add a very tactical kind of obstacle. You know, we're trying to bring this learning opportunity to many of our suppliers who are smaller, who maybe don't have dedicated teams for climate. And so share of mind is really a challenge as well, and something that we're going to need to address. And I think Supplier S-LoCT has done a good job acknowledging that, embracing that, and then designing for it in creating really bite-sized trainings that are much more manageable to bring to a supplier who is newer at this, who maybe is, you know, the person that you're asking to join is double hatting as the regulatory person, or maybe they're the commercial lead, but they're also being asked to figure out the company's carbon footprint. So I think one of the keys to success has been creating this really bite-sized training that's very engaging. You've got your cheesy company keeping it fun. And suppliers are coming back. We just finished our past season and we're moving into a fall season, and we've seen almost 80% retention with our suppliers. So if that doesn't tell you that they like it and they're ready to sign up for more, you know, I don't know what else does.
Mm-hmm. So I'd like to invite those of you in the audience here, sorry virtual audience, to ask any questions if they have them. And I believe there is someone with a microphone, or is that not the case? Are we doing, no? Okay,
We're a
small room.
Yeah.
If you have a question, let's get it out. Like, if you could just tell us give us some context for your question, like who you are and what organization you represent. And just shout out your question, please.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Una from Starbucks. Thank you for the presentation. And a question for you is, how do you support the suppliers in terms of picking the data kind of platform that they're using? So it's like we have everything from How Good, Cool Farms Alliance tools, so many different options. How do you support them in terms of knowing what's best for them, and how do you actually support companies then for being able to bring all of that together for the work that we all have to do to disclose information?
Mm-hmm. So for the virtual audience, in case you couldn't hear it, it had to do with how the platforms, the data platforms are selected, advice, and since there's so many different types of platforms out there. Anyone want to take that?
I mean, the backbone for this program really is the Greenhouse Gas Protocol as the foundation stone. Now, when you start to get into Scope 3, the second track on Scope 3 emissions, you end up getting into emissions factors and applying emissions factors for different types of activities or different types of commodities. And so our team is very adept in all the different emissions factor databases that are out there and can help the suppliers make choices on that. One thing I didn't mention is that we have kind of a 24/7 help desk. So we offer support during the seminar if they have a question, after the seminar, in the middle of the night, if they have a shower epiphany, they can call us and contact us with any of those questions so that we keep them moving along the journey. So all questions are welcome and get answered as quick as we can.
I think I would just add, I think one thing we really appreciate about the Guidehouse team and approach is that it's not necessarily trying to create a global standardization. It's, as Matt's mentioning, it's very aligned with the greenhouse gas protocol, but it's not like we're picking and choosing and creating recommendations to suppliers. We're really keeping it open-ended to be able to absorb the kind of data and information that they have, and then the Guidehouse experts are helping them to navigate how to use that data and slot it in so that you can do the calculations in alignment with the GHG protocol.
Yeah. With the eventual disclosure to CDP, we're encouraging all of them to disclose to CDP.
Kate, do you have any flip side perspective on that? How did you choose your platform?
Obviously my background is in more environmental, so I know which platforms I would use to choose the data. But I think one point I would add is that, if you are a new supplier joining this, it is really informative and actually it does guide you all the way through, and that help and support is really important, especially if somebody doesn't have that skill set. And what's really important is that the supplier, as they're going through the process, actually learns all the different steps, and that is the bit that all of a sudden it will trick. It'll trip the change within the suppliers. And all of a sudden, that embracing of actually this is really simple. It's not rocket science, really, if we look at it.
Right.
And it does make a difference in that. And like you say, all the help and support that you get from behind the scenes is good. Yeah. So if you are doing this as a new supplier coming into it, then I would probably do this session, if you could, before you were going to report to the CDP. And obviously, if you're an advanced supplier, knowledge-wise, then you can do that anytime. But it does help you get to that end goal in a methodical manner. So it's,
Other questions? Yes, again, if your name and your question.
Sure. I'm Lucille. I'm from Climate Science. We make climate change easy to understand with education across over 200,000 learners. My question is sort of, as climate education gets stronger on the supplier side, I would imagine it's reinforced by a more informed public that would then, of course, buy those goods. So I'm curious what you think the role of suppliers or companies are in making climate education and sort of what you're doing in the field of climate more well known to the folks on the demand side, that is the general public, young people, so that it sort of goes hand in hand as we step up climate presence on the supply side.
So if I could just briefly summarize that question for the virtual audience, that's a great question, thank you. What is the sort of responsibility of the suppliers then to participate in the demand generation with their partners? And hopefully that was a good summation. Kind of? Okay, good.
Yeah, I think a couple of thoughts. One is, we've talked a lot about education for our suppliers, but there's a need for education for many different populations. So we've done a few things at ELC in terms of internal engagement, so creating e-learnings, and we've even done lots of internal events this week for our employees to make sure that they're hearing about what we're all doing in these rooms and on these stages. So creating that awareness inside the company is really key. And then I think the other place where we have a role to play as a consumer goods company and as a beauty brand is through our brands. And our brands are very engaged on this topic. They want to know what their carbon footprint is. They want to know how they can contribute. They're thinking about how they can create products that are even more environmentally friendly, that are low carbon, that are using low carbon ingredients in packaging. And so I do think that we have a significant role to play in the responsibility that we have to consumers and the opportunity to think about conscious consumers and how we can meet their expectations through our products.
I'm pretty sure I saw a response from you, Kate, and then Matt.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think for me, you know, one of the key things that we worked with Estée Lauder was actually having that communication, making it extremely transparent around why things might look different, because, you know, as a supplier's responsibility is to provide alternative solutions to more sustainable products. And sometimes they're not quite as shiny and as glossy as you might want them to be. But actually, when you start to discuss what those changes are, so for example, printing, you know, I'm different because, you know, I'm trying to be more sustainable, and informing the public, you know, when you see something in the window, that's really powerful. And actually, the responses that we get from, you know, from the consumers are saying, yeah, this is great. I'm really pleased that you're doing this. So, you know, that's how, as a supplier, and, you know, and specifically what we do at TAG is really try and help encourage those changes, because, you know, your footprint's our footprint, and, you know, we're all trying to work in the same direction.
Yeah, I'll just quickly note that this is something we're taking a look at. It's kind of my favorite topic, because I think we're on the cusp of a really interesting consumer awareness opportunity. There's 70 million millennial moms in the market right now that have an interest in this issue, and they are the first generation that will have had climate education from kindergarten throughout their schooling. And so they are tuning into this issue. That's the demographic that a lot of people have identified as tuning into this. And so I think there's some great stories to tell that need to reach that audience, because a lot of this stuff lives in the doldrums of a sustainability report, and it doesn't get into the, you know, national conversation or across the consumer community.
Sure, sure. We actually have a microphone now for any questions from the audience. I think there's one back there. Yep. Hi.
Hi, Gabriela Merla from Laguna. We provide legal advice to public and private entities for implementing climate projects and climate policies. So the question is, you mentioned that you provide education and knowledge to your supply chain, but unfortunately, the help that they need is not limited to education. It is, as some of you mentioned, resources to be able to implement changes, technology, change of process.
Yeah.
So which has been the support that you have provided to your suppliers in your chain value, which is related to this economic resource? Have you done it? You mentioned the Johnson & Johnson. I was very interested to know about it. But maybe you have other ways of providing these resources to your suppliers.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Do you want to summarize the question?
No,
Or
no,
we're
no.
good
She
'cause
has
it
a
was on-
microphone, so
Thank you
we're
for the
good.
question. Yeah, I think, you know, our approach to supplier engagement on climate includes a number of things, right? So we talked about CDP as one mechanism for reporting. Our engagement with Supplier S-LoCT is critical for creating that pathway to increase supplier climate literacy and knowledge. And then we're doing lots of other things in terms of partnering with our suppliers around what it is we're asking them to supply to us. And I think Kate was kind of intimating this when she was describing that last example. We're coming together with suppliers to say, we have goals on climate, you likely do too, and let's think together about how we can synergize our business models such that you're supplying us with products that are going to help support our journey on climate, and we can also continue our business relationships with you, continue to ensure that we have a thriving business relationship. So I think, you know, those are some of the ways that we're looking at this, and we're also taking a lot of inspiration from this week. You know, we're here to listen and learn, and I think there are a lot of great companies who are working on things like creating renewables accelerators for their suppliers and lots of other opportunities that we'd be interested to look into as we advance our climate journey.
Any additions to that? Do you see, Matt, from your perspective, have you seen other resources that have emerged from the work that these companies have been doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all about evolution, and we're at a point where first the ecosystem has to be educated, and then we can start to take some of these broader steps. And so in the apparel sector, there's some pilot work going on to create a supplier fund. And it's just in its initial stages, but our team is looking at how to support reduction opportunities in the apparel supply chain, particularly in contract manufacturers in Asia. So, some of those examples are emerging, but it's an evolving field.
Yep. Other questions from the room? Yes. Over here. You can see her. Thank you.
Hi, thanks. I'm Taylor Gills from the Aspen Institute, and we run a project called Cargo Owners for Zero Emission Vessels, which is helping forward-facing companies, climate-leading companies, to accelerate the decarbonization of the maritime space. And so I was wondering about the transportation, parts of supply chain. So how are you all engaging in that, and especially in, hard-to-abate sectors like shipping, where there's not a solution that your suppliers can switch to off the shelf now, that zero-emission shipping doesn't exist? So I just wanted to learn more about the transportation parts of the framework.
Yeah, for our business, transportation is a significant portion of our Scope 3 emissions, and so it's an area where we're pulling together our partners within the business cross-functionally who have knowledge about this. So the experts on transportation and distribution, the folks who are modeling out what our future pathway are going to look like, who are understanding what our needs and demand are going to be into the future. And we're also partnering with our suppliers to understand what kind of capabilities they have, what kind of tracking of emissions data they have, what kind of technological innovations that they're investing in. So it's a very active work stream for us, where we are pulling together our cross-functional partners to investigate what are the opportunities, and then to start creating the building blocks for what's going to be a glide path to hit our targets for our T&D category specifically.
Any other comments?
From my perspective, we've got such a wide and diverse supply chain. I try to look at it in a slightly different angle, whereas I build tools to help the teams when they're engaging with the clients to make sure that we're lightweighting, we're reducing weight, we're reducing sizes where possible, so that we can actually start to minimize as well. So it's a combination of both looking at your supply chain, how it's managed, but also the products that you're buying and how they have an impact all the way through the system, right through to the end of the life. So I think there's a combination of different elements.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Hi, my name is Mariana Barbosa. I'm from Brazil. I work in a Brazilian company that is trying to restore as much as possible. We have the goal to restore 1 million hectares in Amazon. So my question is how you're seeing the offset in the supply chain. So like if you find out that your supply chain is unable to reduce and reach the target by reducing the emissions, like how do you see and envisage the compensation and offset in the supply chain?
Yeah, I think for us, I mentioned that we're guided by our goals, and our science-based target means that offsets are not part of the equation for hitting that target, but they are an important component of our overall approach to climate and sustainability. We do use offsets for our e-commerce, for example. Some of our brands will choose to use offsets, but more broadly, we're thinking a lot about deforestation issues. We have commitments around no deforestation, and we're actively investing in conservation and reforestation programs. We have a body of work on what we call our sensitive ingredients, and these are ingredients that, because of their environmental or social profiles, we're really leaning in on things like traceability and investing at origin. And many of those projects involve work on some of the issues that you're raising. So working on reforestation, working on building capability, for example, of indigenous women in South America to take the helm and really lead within their communities to protect biodiversity, to enhance biodiversity, to conserve, to reforest. So that's absolutely part of our broader portfolio on how we approach the climate discussion, and also think about our role in nature-based solutions and biodiversity.
So I actually want to ask just a slight follow-up, because the science-based targets topic just came up, and I just want to ask, Kate, TAG is setting science-based targets. What has been the biggest obstacle or the biggest pain point in doing that? And I'm just curious how, if at all, Estée Lauder is helping you figure that out.
Okay, so for TAG, it really is quite simple, and I think it probably is for everybody else. It is understanding the data piece that sits within the supply chain, especially when it represents above the minimum percentage that needs to be. And when it's up at the 85%, then you have to be as clean-cut data-wise as possible. But actually getting that data when you've got thousands of suppliers is extremely difficult, challenging is what I would say. Sometimes you might think it's like running the gauntlet. However, if you start driving down that route and really engaging with your supply chain, you can start to move some of those blockers. But the data is probably the key things. And it's things that aren't in your control. So where it's in your control, it's really simple because you own the data. And where not, it's a challenge.
You must have some thoughts on this, given your background.
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess, if you could refine the question.
Well, so, I mean, how can an Estée Lauder, how can a larger company help their suppliers really get into that? I mean, some companies are now requiring it of their partners. How do they get there? How do they get that SBTI goal set, the science-based target set?
Yeah, well, I think, there are more severe programs out there that apply a penalty, and that sometimes can be more of a stick approach. So if you look in Europe, there's something called the CO2 performance ladder. And in that system, you get a lower ranking in the procurement process if you don't reduce your emissions year on year. My experience so far has been that most brands are not ready to go there yet.
Yep.
Okay. But I think over time, there are only so many ways you can influence your supply chain, and you need those suppliers. So there's this dance that has to be done with the supplier that has to be done extremely carefully. And when you bring the procurement function and the supply chain function of the company into some of these conversations, they put their head in their hands and say, oh my gosh, we've already asked them about palm oil. Now you want me to get them to reduce their carbon footprint? So it's tricky, and it has to be a diplomatic process, just like everything with climate change.
Right. I think we have time for one more question in the room, and then we have a wrap up. Yes, right here with the blue shawl.
Yes, hi, Louise Moretto from DWS. Just curious, how far away are we from having products that have CO2 emissions on it so that consumers know? So we have all other types of food labeling, nutrition. Is that something that we'll have in the future so that consumers have a sense of how carbon intensive their purchases are?
Yeah, it's a very active area of work. I think Europe and the regulations and guidance that have been put out around the PEF have been useful in terms of setting the frameworks, but I think there's still a lot of discussion to be had about exactly how do we calculate it and how do we ensure that we're comparing apples to apples if those numbers start to go out on products. But I think it's a great North Star to set and direction of travel. We want to create transparency for consumers around what they're purchasing. We'd also love to create differentiation in the marketplace in terms of our products, but still a lot to figure out in terms of the nuts and bolts of how we measure it, what are the boundaries, what are the right methodologies, but a very active area for our company and for many companies in our industry and others who are all interested in that challenge and looking for ways to make it a reality.
Okay, we're going to end with a speed round. Just one final piece of advice, recommendation for the folks in the room. How do they get their suppliers on this journey, Matt?
Get started. I think as we've alluded to, we're making up for lost time. The pandemic slowed things down, even though we got this off the ground. So my recommendation to other brands that are in the room is come join us. And the future is bright as we try to address this issue. And our experience as the suppliers are very enthusiastic about taking on this topic. It's become a legacy issue for a lot of companies.
Kate.
Yeah, and for me, I think managing this program, especially through the Supplier-LoCT process, is really, it opens suppliers' eyes to be able to do it in a methodical way. So, really for me, it's important that, you step on and start going up that ladder.
Megan?
Yeah, I agree. Get going. Corporate buyers can be a really important catalyst in this work of bringing suppliers along. So take full advantage of that opportunity and that responsibility. And just think about how much easier all of this tough work on Scope 3 would be if your suppliers all were calculating their footprint, ready to set their targets, and in a position to take action. So, really think about what benefits would accrue to your company and your goals if you had suppliers that were upskilled to that level. And then certainly think about joining us. We're happy to talk with any companies who are interested in the experience. The more of us that are involved, the bigger impact that we can have, and that's what we all need to get it done.
Great. Well, please, thanks to you for your attention, but also please thank our speakers, Megan, Kate, and Matt.